Good morning, and thank you for staying with us here on Smooth 98.1, Smooth Breakfast with Valentine Ohu. It is time for us to get into the segments that goes into deep analysis, in-depth analysis on the newspaper stories for today. We have to do the analysis, to share this analysis, Nwaji Jibuno at the Corporate MC and Tunde Okufi at Big Coves. Good morning, Nwaji.
Good morning, Valentine. Good morning, Tunde, and good morning, Lagos.
Good morning, Tunde. Welcome.
And good morning, Nwaji.
So much this morning for obvious reasons. I love this. Guys.
Good news.
Please join in the fun. It's a feel-good Friday. Go on YouTube and watch. YouTube.com/Smooth981FM Lagos. Or you can just type in the search box Smooth981FM Lagos and subscribe so you can watch and leave the comment there as well. Now, you can send messages to WhatsApp 0809-444-0981. You can also leave a message on Twitter at Smooth981FM with the hashtag FreshlyPressed981. Tunde, I'll start with you. On the story from the Vanguard newspaper, we can no longer bear 120 billion naira monthly subsidy burden. That's a revelation that was made yesterday by the Minister of Petroleum Resources, Timipre Silva, at the State House. The group managing director as well, Mele Kyari, said that the NNPC currently subsidizes cost of premium motor spirit at about 120 billion naira monthly. When I did the calculation, the difference that it offsets is 72 naira on each landing cost. But take us through this story and also, share your thoughts, please.
Look, this thing is going to come to, or has to come to a head at some point, and eventually would. And it seems like it's sooner rather than later. To be honest, it's we can't continue to bear this. The government, it's a bit of a difficult situation. Is when we all know it's the attendant knock-on effect on the economy and price effect on, as we like to say, the common man, on everyone really. But is a fuel subsidy, right? This takes me back to memories of, Occupy Nigeria, when we're insistent that, fuel subsidies were a share of the national cake. In consideration, how much of a drain and shackle it was, and just a conduit for mass corruption and fraud. I can't say that this is devoid of that as well. So there's, on the one hand, saying, look, we can't make hardship, we can't make things any harder, we can't impose further. On the other hand, we can't afford it. Population looking at it, that look, we can't afford it, yet what would appear as a bunch of other frivolous. You hear cases of graft up and down, left and right. So the story or the idea that the country sits very well with everyone, but the truth is we just can't continue to do this. What we're paying for is years of neglect and inefficiencies. I would that organized labor abilities and had fought. One, if we're looking in recent times, then, right, this is the implication of the regulation. But more importantly, not even recently, I would have preferred, when I say we're paying for inefficiencies, right, when our refineries started breaking down, right, decades ago, where was organized labor? These are the things and times that do put pressure on the government. I know some of this was obviously during military era, and we didn't have the same sort of freedoms that we have now. But those are the times that organized labor in particular should have been putting pressure. What we're paying for now is decades of inefficiency, decades of bad management, and we're in a difficult situation, we're in a jam, really, where, damned if you do, damned if you don't, literally between a rock and a hard place is where we are. And it's interesting to find out where we're pulling this money up from, because there's no subsidy in the budget. And so this is coming off of somehow directly from NNPC's books. And when you compare, the news coming out earlier this week around, Aramco declaring, that's the Saudi Arabia oil company, declaring, dividends for its shareholders. That's, more than double our, annual budget.
Yes.
And this is our budget that we have to go and borrow to fund. Then it starts to, give you an idea of the level of problem that we're in, to say the least.
Even if Saudi Aramco suffered about 50% loss in the last year in terms of revenue generated during the COVID, but at least that should send home that message. But thank you for that reference, Tunde. Now, Nwaji, let's go to this next story. Lagos kicks nurses fault FG, federal government, as alleged vaccine sale surfaces. Allegations were trailing the vaccine distribution. People alleging that there are certain centers. One location that was mentioned was the police clinic in Ikoyi. In this story, it was mentioned that there was an unscheduled visit that the Lagos State government or Ministry of Health actually carried out, and it was discovered that nothing like that was happening. But what's your take on this story, especially looking at the exercise in general?
Yeah, I 100% agree with the nurses that there wasn't a comprehensive plan that was put in place prior to the deployment of these vaccines to the public. And I think, what the nurses are lamenting against is that there's a big distinction between having available vaccines and then having a vaccination program. A vaccination program now speaks to how robust with regards to the distribution and who qualifies and everything else. And you can't now necessarily just do it in name alone. It has to be done in practice. Now, I'm sorry, all these things are coming back and saying that people are not charging or are not qualified. It's simply not true. All you have to do is go on social media and look at all the different people that are posting images of them getting vaccines, and then you cross-reference those individuals who you happen to know. Some of them are very popular celebrities, some are influencers, some could be friends and family, and you cross-reference those people against who qualifies for this first phase of the vaccine. And then you have to be very, very intellectually honest with yourself about whether or not these individuals qualify for the vaccine. So when people now want to get into big conversations about, oh, I've taken the vaccine, et cetera, I'm like, yeah, but why are you going to take a vaccine? Are you a frontline worker? Are you a particular individual that qualifies within this category that has been clearly stipulated by the government? So why are you going to a health center when you are very much aware that you do not qualify for a vaccine and you're getting it? And then even at that particular health center where you have been refused based on these regulatory guidelines, you're now bringing out money and you somehow expect the system to work. So I agree 100% with the nurses. The system is compromised. It's unfortunate that it's compromised, because what's just now beginning to happen is that you now have a situation where people who should have gotten the vaccine are not going to get the vaccine. We don't have an unlimited supply of the vaccines. 4 million vaccines came into Nigeria, and this was meant to be equitably distributed across all 36 states to ensure that individuals within these categories got it first. And then what COVAX have said is that you get your next batch after you've exhausted this 4 million. But if you do not now address the individuals who happen to qualify for this vaccines, then you just create a spiraling problem. So what's not going to happen with the second dose is that you're not going to create a further issue as well. So I agree 100% with the nurses that the government need to have a robust regulatory program in place to ensure that certain checks and balances are put in so that individuals who do not qualify for the vaccine have absolutely no access to it. And people should not, unfortunately, bribe their way towards getting a vaccine. Just because you have the means and the money and the capacity and the influence to do so doesn't mean that you deserve it. We're talking about life and death here. We're talking about people's health. So it's quite unfortunate. And these nurses are completely correct, because they're in a compromised position when they have not been carried along with regards to how best to deploy these vaccines that could save lives. So I'm with them. And I think my message this morning is that people need to be have a lot more morality with regards to how they go about getting this vaccine, because it's very important. Now, for me, is deeply, deeply irresponsible when you do not qualify for this vaccine. You go get this vaccine and then you're posting it on social media as though you've done something courageous. That's just my opinion.
Yes, well, I got the vaccine on Monday, right? And when I went there, I saw a lot of people being admitted without restriction, especially people who were above 70 years of age that fall into that category. Right. And the frontline workers, the doctors and medical professionals.
So hold on, well, Valentine, you qualify as a member of the press, correct?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. So that's but
yes, but another point I wanted to raise, Nwaji, in this conversation is the fact that these vials, you know how they are stored, and you know what happens when a vial has been opened and the vials are thawing. It has to be used within a specific period of time before it expires, and we don't want to incur losses. And you know the apathy people have towards the vaccine these days. So how do we encourage more people to go get vaccinated? So we do things the proper way, and we get these people that actually should get this vaccine to receive the vaccine. So that's my question. I guess for you, it's rhetorical.
But Valentine, you are 100% correct. Because what now begins to happen is that the way things are going, you're only going to create further apathy. Because if I'm in my 60s and my 50s and I go there and I'm being told to wait, and I see some 30-something-year-old guy bringing out money to pay a vaccine, I'm going to be like, to hell with it. And that's just you see, you are 100% correct on the money. You only create further apathy. So what now begins to happen is that you're not going to exhaust the current vaccines that you have, because COVAX have told you AstraZeneca is not going to come to you unless you exhaust this possible thing. But what's not happening is a land grab coming out of nowhere, just trying to get theirs. And then what's going to happen is that the people who do need it are going to say, you know what, to hell with it. And that's the problem.
All right. So I'm going to say this in closing and say it very clearly. The vaccine is free, F-R-E-E, free. Because yesterday somebody asked me at the gym, how much do you pay? I thought that was the most ridiculous question I heard this week. But it's free, right? Absolutely free. Go get vaccinated. And let's move on to the next story. Tunde, food exports records 50% surge as airlines scramble for cargo. Just yesterday, I saw a news headline or sub-headline that said something about food being served, the resumption of food services on airlines or in airlines, because I know that stopped for a bit, because the last time I traveled, I took a local travel. There was nothing to eat. There was no refreshment, just water. But what are your thoughts regarding this and the metrics that were revealed in this detail? Sorry, Tunde, we can't hear you. Your audio.
Apologies, I didn't realize I was on mute. So I said, well, this isn't about in-flight entertainment, or let's say in-flight feeding. It's about exporting food to the huge number of people or huge number of Nigerians we have in the diaspora. You get, very often people are who left this country decades ago cannot, live without their plantain, their yam, even pap, apparently, right? So many things have come together to so this is a good story, to be honest. This is a bright light in the midst of, so much economic, so I don't want to say gloom, but, it's a bright light among so many other things. Anything that we can exchange for FX at this time is great and fantastic news. And the story says that there's a 50% surge. And like I said, a bunch of factors have come together to make this happen. One, the overarching one, obviously, is the pandemic and lockdown, which has put a squeeze on passenger, travel and flights. So the airlines have had to pivot in order to stay in business and pivot more towards cargo. And food has accounted for the vast majority of that cargo. In the past, what would have happened is, as individuals, you and I travel frequently in the past. What happened is, family members would say, can you bring me this, bring me that? So people would have carried items in small batches to satisfy some of that demand. But as that has virtually, taken a significant hit, it's now pivoted towards, sending it via air cargo, air freight. Sea is still where most of the world's trade goes through, but things like perishable goods and food are best when they're especially obviously because they're perishable, are best air freighted, right? So that's what's pushed that towards air freighting, and it's a good source of revenue, and it's supporting local businesses who are exporting this food to Nigerians in the diaspora. And earning FX for the country. So it's great. It's surprising that, we have a country that, suffers from food insecurity in some way, is able to export some of its food, but it's for much needed, foreign exchange. So
Thank you for hitting that nail on the head, because I was concerned. I was like, okay, first, you remember I think it was a month or two ago that there was a projection that there would be a serious case of food insecurity in this few months, especially with the insecurity situation around the north. Farmers with the farmer header clashes and all that. So this is actually very encouraging news, and thanks for thanks for that initial clarity. Now we have messages on WhatsApp 0809444091. Let me go through the ones. Oh my goodness, a lot. Yinka Bello says, "Abeg, do they allow us export yam flour?" Asking for someone before we start. God no go shame us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously you need to do all your findings, but the exporting thing, even as white, and I'm shocked, exporting live snail, usually they don't even allow the exporting of livestock, but, countries have had to, sort of pivot. So there's yam, there's cassava that we have a shortage of. So who knows?
All right. Jane reacts to the vaccine story. She said, at the health center, some frontliners have bluntly refused to take it because of the propaganda going around. See, apathy that we're talking about. JP says, good morning, freshly pressed. Valid comment. Where's the money for subsidy coming from? Labour is always reactionary. As for the vaccine, Lagos hitting 70,000 only in a week is abysmal. Okay. How long does it take to vaccinate? How many frontline workers, for Pete's sake? All right. Jerry says they must continue to subsidize it, as they can't stop now because it's too late in the day. They've so impoverished the country that nobody can afford to take the brunt anymore. If they had removed the subsidy as soon as they got into power, would have gotten over it now. It's their inefficiency. Let them enjoy it. Hamza says, I totally disagree with the comment on COVID vaccine. Although this platform is not enough for us to argue this point effectively, yes, it's not enough, but we can go ahead and argue on social media about constructive arguments. OG from Amor says, 100% agree with Nwaji's point on the vaccines. We whine and whine that our systems don't work, but we all take advantage of it to further our own selfish interests. Why are you going to take a vaccine you know should be for frontliners and old people? So many people I know got it, and yet doctors don't have it yet. Dr. I says, hello, are we not tired of the outright lies by the government about fuel subsidy? Are you going to hold the minister and the president responsible for the corruption? GEJ had a better plan, but bias will not allow us to revisit it. We are eating our future, paying an inflated subsidy. Open up NNPC and Ministry of Health. Dr. I, thank you. Chris says, NNPC is one of Nigeria's biggest problems, if not the biggest. It's a study in fraud, incompetence, and inefficiency. NNPC should be unbundled, as they produce nothing but misery for Nigerians.
100%.
Ali from our papa says, my sister is a frontline worker and she had just asked that I visit for the last batch of vaccination for the week because they still have more shots. But I was skeptical about going because I'm not a frontline worker. And I felt that there are more people who need it. But apparently people aren't showing up. That's why there are still more shots unused. And Ali's right. Tara says, at the end of the day, everything in Nigeria goes to the highest bidder. Okay. Dorothy says, the only reason why the registration process was jettisoned is what is going on now. So what the custodians can racketeer, or so that the custodians can racketeer the process. Corruption isn't just a government thing. It's looking like it's engraved in our DNA. No, it's not. Let's move on to this next story. Mass metering, talking about mass metering, Nwaji. The Vanguard reports on this story. It says Senate lampoons the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission on mass metering projects in the country, despite the 33.4 billion naira already released by the central bank for the sector. Your thoughts, please.
All right. Well, unfortunately, and even if you go into the story itself, this is a bit of a convoluted argument. And in as much as you can see where the Senate is coming from, but I don't think it's that straightforward, because in order to be balanced, you also have to look at it from the DISCO's point of view, where there's certain money that was earmarked that wasn't released in a certain particular time. So their counter argument is that, yes, that money was earmarked to be released for the equitable distribution of meters across board. And given that they were only performing at 13% of that distribution target, it makes it seem as if the DISCOs are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. But then DISCOs will now come back and say, okay, fine, well, who's supposed to front that particular cash to be able to ensure that this is done? So it's a bit of a convoluted argument, but the bottom line is that whoever is responsible, the fact that this conversation is still going on, and it's not just recent, this is going back as far as the Yar'Adua administration, when this metering program actually started. And the fact that we are at 13% is the definition of insanity. You keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting the same results is what you're going to get. And that's the issue we're facing. So somebody needs to step up and take responsibility, whether it's CBN for the slow release of the funds that these people need to be able to resource the distribution of this metering program, or is it on part of the DISCOs and NERC to be able to come out and speak early enough to indicate that they don't have the resources to be able to distribute this metering program? Or is it on NERC to say, okay, fine, how best can we create different fundings so that we can ensure that these meters are distributed? So whoever has the wherewithal to more or less speak on the solution moving forward needs to step up, because we cannot, and it's indicated in the story, we cannot continue with estimated billing. It is not acceptable. It is not sustainable. It makes absolutely no sense. You should pay for what you consume. You cannot be told that a general calculation is done in the area. What if your neighbor decides to run 4 air conditions 12 hours a day and you decide to run none? So the two of you are not going to pay the same electricity bill. It just doesn't make any sense. So bottom line is, we need to distribute, in a country like Nigeria, we need to distribute meters across board into very certain communities. It needs to be free and it needs to be accessible and it needs to be properly regulated, so that for the power that people are getting, they can now begin to pay for that power, even though we don't have 24-hour electricity. But then the further knock-on effect is this: you actually generate more money from prepaid meters. And this is part of the revenue assurance that even justified the deployment of metering to begin with. Because what was happening with estimated billing was that there was a lot of contests with regards to the bills. People were not paying this cash. They were contesting it. Some of these actually went to court. And then this now paid with you getting your cash. But whereas with prepaid metering, you literally pay for what you consume. Because if you don't,
there's proof.
And there's proof. And if you don't have enough units, it goes off, you top up. So it's a fantastic way for NERC and the DISCOs to generate cash. So why there isn't more of it available, it is absolutely bewildering. Because because if you make that investment, you can recoup it in a shorter amount of time. So why that money is not being released, why people are not making noise about that, is one of the enigmas wrapped in a colossal mystery that's called Nigeria.
There's another enigma there, is the fact that, or why we can't be transparent with this process of power. Why can't we arrest it once and for all? What is the problem? Why don't we want the solution finally? Because it's like, estimated billing is like, imagine if telcos charged us estimated billing for phone use, for data, for calls.
Nobody will
imagine
use it.
that.
Nobody will use it.
Exactly.
We'll send pigeons to communicate with each other. Yeah.
So we'll have more foreign direct investments. Business will thrive. People will make more money. People will be more business will be enabled. We'll become more technologically advanced. Can I continue? So many things that can be solved if we can arrest this power problem once and for all. It sounds like common sense, but I don't know why it's not common.
Yeah, common sense actually makes it more complicated.
Common sense eludes us as a nation.
So the Premium Times has this next report on Senate considering a bill to support families of fallen servicemen and women. What does it entail for you?
Well, this is common sense. Oh, goodness. One of the things that we're often late to, it only makes sense. Look, not just fallen servicemen, we know how poorly remunerated and treated active servicemen are. And then add on to that, it's a Nigerian-based sound.
Go ahead. I mean, emphasizing the power issue that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Add on to that, what happens when servicemen fall, either in the line of duty or otherwise, right? Their families are often neglected. You only need to see families within the police barracks or army barracks. The kids can't go to school. It's a mess, right? So things like this need to be in place to create an incentive, one, for people to join, and two, for people to carry out their duties to the best of their abilities, and hopefully without fear of favor. It's the poor welfare package within in a number of these forces is what contributes to the corruption on the job. It's not the sole reason, right? But it is one of the reasons where the feelings that I've got to watch out for myself. Nobody's watching out for me, right? And if these things are in place, then there's an incentive to also act properly, because if you get dismissed or you're otherwise punished in a certain way, maybe you lose your benefits and your family loses benefits if you fall in the line of duty or otherwise, So again, it's common sense. It's long overdue. We need to do a lot more for our active, servicemen across different security agencies. In other countries, the police, for instance, are first responders. The police they are indeed first responders. Something happens, they are one of the first people to arrive at the scene, regardless, right? And they're supposed to be able to do a bunch of things, including, first aid and so much. But with Nigeria, we know that our police are not first responders. It's just us. It doesn't work that way, So,
but
they're not even third, fourth, or fifth responders, So, but technically they are. So we need to enable and empower them to be that. And this is one of those things. It makes sense.
To be that. That's right. Just like we were talking about fire service yesterday on the Grapevine, and talking about the availability of certain resources for them to do their jobs. If you enable the policemen, like you said, or the security operatives, they'll be able to do their jobs better. It'll be interesting. I actually encourage everyone to go through details of the Premium Time story that we just discussed. Some of the details and provisions of the bill would excite you, interest you. One of them, under financial empowerment, when any member of the named security agencies dies in combat or a combat death, the board shall pay the spouse the sum of 5 million naira and shall counsel her on such entrepreneurship programs that will enable her to invest the sum profitably for the welfare of the children left behind by the deceased. I raised this part because 2 days ago we highlighted this issue, especially with inferring a situation of a girl that one of us encountered at the airport, and she identified herself as an orphan of servicemen, and she was asking for help, for financial support. So these are the things that we don't need to see.
Exactly. It's a horrible situation. My take is that 5 million and 2 million is next to nothing, but it's a start.
Yes, it is a start. Thank you. Nwaji, next story is still on Premium Times. Money laundering. Federal government tenders bags of multiple currencies against Buhari's ex-appointee. Who is this, and what is this about? Please go on and share the story with us.
Yes, so the person in question is a former top officer in the Nigerian Air Force, Umar Mohammed. And somebody from DSS, through some investigation, discovered several bags of currency within his residence, and has now brought it to the court to accuse him of money laundering. And his defense team is saying that even though he is now retired, he is a businessman. And that is what gives him access to this amount of cash. And the accusation is that this money was earmarked during the time that this individual was responsible for the procurement of weapons and military hardware to fight insurgency in Boko Haram. Now, I'm not going to get into if he stole the money, he didn't steal the money, because honestly, that's left to the courts to decide. But for me, the larger issue is this. When you carry large amounts of currency, right, you create and open yourself up to these conversations. And that is just a fundamental. So whether you acquired it through legal means or you acquired it through illegal means, somebody's going to see that money and somebody's going to whistleblow, because that is, frankly speaking, how DSS found out. They didn't conduct this investigation under the auspices of just suspicion alone. They conducted this investigation off of word that they got from somebody, probably somebody who works in your house, or probably somebody who visited your house and saw this large amounts of money and were like, what on earth? Like, you're an Air Force officer. What are you doing with $500,000 and millions and millions of naira and other currencies from CFA and Trinidad and Tobago dollars and Caribbean dollars? It doesn't make any sense.
Do you understand? Almost like he's a BDC on his own.
Right. So, but for me, the more fundamental issue is you acquire that money, and I'm not going to get into, because what's happening is that they're linking it to his position, they're linking it to the timing and everything else. They're trying to weave a story. You have that amount of cash in your house. You happen to be a former public official, right? Is going to raise suspicion that you acquired this money through illicit means. And you see, I think for me, the larger message is this, and further down in the story, it also indicates something to do with EasyJet being under investigation because a certain amount of money was used in a transactionary manner without going through a proper financial institution. And for someone like Tunde, this is what he does the bread and butter, organizations that he has worked for and works for have invested a lot of money to ensure financial inclusion, to ensure that these things are transparent. So my whole thing is why not, however you do it, why not just utilize the existing systems unless you're trying to hide something? And you see, that's where the issue goes, because if you're running a very, let me use the word transparent and honest business, then why do you have to have such large sports of cash? Everything can run through the regular financial system if indeed it's legit. But when you are hiding something or you're doing something illicit, then that's what creates the suspicion. I'm not trying to castigate judgment on anybody, because I'm not a lawyer, I'm not in the courts, but you really leave very little for the imagination when you do these kind of things. And I think that's what the main issue is.
That's absolutely true, Nwaji. Thank you so much. And it actually gives me a bit of relief that the SSS can clamp down on certain people of high profile like this at airports, knowing what happens at airports sometimes, anything for the boys, bros, for the happy weekend and stuff like that. But I must thank you, Tunde, Okufi, and Nwaji Jibuno. Nwaji is at Corporate MC, Corporate with a K. Tunde is at Big Coops. A final message from Yinka to you, Tunde. Says, tell Tunde he has to shout out Nepal. That soundtrack does not just go alone.
I'm telling you. You know how that thing traumatizes partners when you're on calls with them. Like, what's happened? Yeah. What's happened? Is there an evacuation notice? They're firing the building.